Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to our 2021 virtual series, Innovate at UCLA. We are the premier membership organization for SoCal and now beyond SoCal for our members to not only hear exciting speakers, but also to network and join us in many different ways. We're very privileged today to have a great speaker, as well as our own Erica Nolting-Young, who is a senior manager at Slalom Consulting, and our overall program chair, to host this event and to introduce our speaker. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Erica to do so. Thank you to Erica and Laura for being here. Erica, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at our fourth virtual series of 2021. I'm thrilled to introduce you all to Laura Merling, someone who has reached tremendous heights in her career, someone who I very much look forward to, and who's put together a really insightful presentation for you today. Laura is the Managing Director of Digital Transformation at Google Cloud. She's an industry-leading pioneer who has held executive roles in sales, marketing, product management, and more at Fortune 100 companies and venture capital-funded startups. Her breadth of experience includes Ford, AT&T, Mashery, Sybase, McKinsey, and more. And she's been responsible for ecosystem development and platform solutions at AT&T. Laura has shaped autonomous vehicle strategy and global digital services strategy at Ford, and she's been instrumental in the technology, transportation, and industrial sectors, leading digital transformation initiatives throughout her career. She continues to influence transportation in her new role as a managing director and transformation officer at Google Cloud. And today we brought Laura because she's pulled together a really interesting perspective on the future of consulting and professional services. I had the privilege of getting a little bit of a sneak preview of it previously. And I thought Laura would bring a really great perspective to everybody here today. As we kick off, we will take questions throughout the presentation, so don't feel that you have to wait until the end. I will be keeping an eye on the chat. If you post a question there, I'll raise your question to Laura as we go. And don't be bashful, Laura will stop along the way and see if anyone has questions. So if you'd like, you can unmute and ask questions directly as well. Without further ado, I introduce you to Laura Merling. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me to speak today. Looking forward to the conversation. Just kind of, you might be asking, why is this person who's at Google Cloud talking about consulting and the future of consulting? As Erica mentioned, I spent some time at McKinsey, but also at Slalom Consulting. But one of the things that I have been thinking about for several years is I have a very specific role in what I tend to do in companies personally. And so this is important and interesting to me as a professional, because the role that I do is I'm typically a builder. So I go in to build new organizations, new products, new business units. And that role tends to be very short-lived. It looks very much like a consulting type of role. It has a very specific task. It has a very specific outcome. And that outcome varies based upon the industry you're in and the project you have at hand. So that's kind of the genesis for how I got interested in the future of consulting and where it all lies. So I just thought I'd put that out there because you might be asking about that or wondering. So what I'm going to do today is cover three primary areas. The first one is the speed and scale of change, and we're going to look at what that means just in general, and then talk about the workforce and all the things that are happening around the workforce in and of itself and what that means to consulting. And then how do all the changes that are happening and happening at scale, combined with the workforce changes that are happening, how do they shift? You might have heard of Clayton Christensen's 4 functions of consulting. This is Laura's 5 functions of consulting. So we'll talk about that, and then what that means for the future of consulting, and the roles that exist, and how it operates inside of an enterprise, or how enterprises interact with consulting, whether you're an individual or a corporation. So I always like to start with a quote. If you look back at any of my presentations, I try to start with something thought-provoking, and I found this one to probably be the most appropriate for the conversation today, as well as for many other conversations. But the reality is, right, things are just changing fast, and that speed of change is growing exponentially. And it has a combination of everything from technology to population growth, all impacting that. And so I just thought this was a really thoughtful, impactful statement that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the presentation and discussion. So the world as we know it has really changed, right, in the last, I'd say, the last year, the last 18 months, but it was even on a change of trajectory before that. So when you think about it, right, when we think about just the last COVID-19, we think about all the things that have happened, and in the consulting world, we talk about them a lot, and in the enterprise world, we talk about them a lot as well. But what it's really made us think about from a mindset change is that there are new norms, right? Exponential change is perpetual. It is not a one and done, right? It's pervasive. It's in everything that we do. If you think about all the things that changed over the last 18 months, from how you buy groceries to how you interact with your coworkers, or your family, and to how you think about even interaction when you do go to a store. Everything has changed quite dramatically. Think about schools, and I know just as COVID was coming forward in the US, I just wrapped up a consulting project with an education company that was trying to go from a traditional, we'll call it butts and seats business, to how do we get to be a fully online business. And what had happened was the trajectory and all the things that we had provided them, which showed about 18 months. They had about an 18-month window to make some transitions, collapsed into about 18 days. So, and that literally went from us presenting to the world shutting down, or the US shutting down a week later. So just, it happened very quickly, right? So the thing to note here is that even before you had COVID, 62% of global CXOs believed that disruption was going to be happening at scale and ongoing. So just thought it was it's, we think of 2020, the transformation was already happening, right? This exponential change was already happening. And really what COVID did was just multiply it and increase that rate of change. So what does that really mean? Actually, I'm going to go back one before I show you the next slide. We have a poll, I think. Don't we have a poll available? I wanted to ask a quick question. So on the world of change and impact and change, what do you think will cause the biggest change, right? There's lots of things happening. We know it's in everything, every aspect of our life. I'd love to hear from you all. What area you think, what's impacting it the most? Like, what do you think will cause the biggest change as we look forward over the next couple of years? All right, so these are some interesting trends that I thought, if you think about kind of where the world is going, that might be great to share. So these are just US workforce trends, and then we'll talk more broadly about other trends. But before I do that, as you look at the poll, so this is interesting: artificial intelligence as the primary, aging population, and then climate change, and 0 on cryptocurrency. So I think what I'm about to show you may actually change your mind on that polling. So let's talk about the workforce and what's happening in the workforce. So today, currently, in the current world, right, 59% of the workforce is made up of millennials. By 2030, it'll be 75%. And we'll talk about what that means and what the impact is. So each one of these, what we'll do is go through what the impact is. So the workforce that will be independent workers in 2030 will be 60%. Imagine that, 60% of the US workforce will be independent workers. What does that mean? It means they will have more than one job. It means that they will have at least one role that is independent as a worker. Today, there are 40 million independent workers. Today, there are 46%, or should I say 46% of all millennials are independent workers. Now, so if you say today it's 40 million, where will we be by 2030? 100 million. Quite interesting if you just think of the US workforce. Now, the interesting part alongside of that is Europe is on the exact same trajectory of a 60% workforce as independent workers. They're on the exact same trajectory. Now, the workforce that will need a new occupation is 30%. Again, it's also very similar in Europe. When you think of who we are and who Europe is, very industrialized countries, right? We've been around for a long time. Maybe we're not around as long as Europe and the US, but industrialized countries. A lot of this, yes, will be caused by technology, right? But it'll be caused by other things. So this workforce shift is super interesting to think about, again, as we look forward to some of the next couple of slides. Now, the last number is interesting for a different reason. 20% of the workforce will be over the age of 65. There are aging populations. 20% is a pretty substantial number. And why is that important, that 20% will be over the age of 65? The majority of that workforce, the majority of those folks, right? Normally you think, traditionally you might have thought, I want to retire in my 60s, or maybe in my 50s, but maybe I want to retire in my 60s. Are you really going to retire? People are living longer, they're working longer, they're enjoying what they're doing longer. And oh, by the way, when you see what skills come with that age category, right? So think it's baby boomers, it's Gen Xers. What skills come with that category? They're actually widely needed across the marketplace. And what other population has this large aging workforce? Of course, it's us, it's Europe, and it's also China. So really interesting numbers as we look at a little bit more on some of the world population moving forward. Before we go to the next slide, I think we have a question. There you go, exactly. I love it. Some of us are already 65 and not retiring. Yeah, I don't have any. Somebody asked me what my retirement plans were, and I said to keep working. I enjoy it way too much. But beyond the fact that we enjoy it, the skills that we all have are actually still needed, and quite a bit more even as we look forward. All right, so let's go to talk about the millennial workforce first. So can you go to the next slide for me, Erica? Thank you. So millennials will define the labor market in the future, right? So not just based on the number. So the number has the impact on how we operate and how we think about operating. If you look at, so these stats of like the context of millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, and baby boomers, this is the main category of who will be right in the population of the workforce in 2030. These are pulled from about 4 or 5 different sources that I've kind of cross-referenced these over. If you look at millennials, and then we'll look at Gen Z in a second, but millennials, when you just look down that column, you think, all right, I'm a globalist. Okay, we've got a global economy. By the way, the center of the world is actually moving which direction? It's moving east. It's moving closer to be the center of the world from a business perspective, and GDP perspective is moving to be middle of Asia. So being a globalist is good, oriented to their self, ethical, brings up another couple of interesting topics when we look out a little further. Experiences, which we all know. Freedom and flexibility is their work aspiration. Contrast that to stability that you see in the Gen Z population. Things that are similar attitude towards the career. So while they want stability as a work aspiration, they also want attitude toward their career, which is a multitasker. I am going to be doing multiple things. I'm not going to be doing one, right? That goes back to, I had a conversation with someone actually just earlier today, and they said, you know, I was talking to the CEO and having a conversation about you, and they were intrigued by all the things that you do outside of work. Now I'm definitely not in the millennial category. I'm closer towards that Gen X baby boomer category. But I actually find it quite fun to be this career multitasker. But millennials, right? They don't, in this part I found interesting, they don't work with companies. They work with companies versus for companies. Whereas you go all the way to a baby boomer and the career was normally defined by the employer, right? You might stay somewhere for 10 years or 20 years. I told you guys at the beginning of this, I'm a builder, right? What I do is build things. I don't stay and maintain them. I get them stood up. I build them. I get to a point of growth and then hand them off to the next person because that's where I enjoy working. And so that gives me a chance. So I don't work for companies. I work with them to get them to a certain point. So when you think about what careers exist and what things exist for consultants, it's finding that niche where you know your area of expertise is and you're helping a company get there. And more companies, just think about this, over the next year, 10 years, as the world changes dramatically, each company is going to be in a different phase of that change. And so you being able to repeat what you do today for one company and picking it up and doing it for the next company and the next company and the next company is really critical. And it doesn't even need to be the same vertical. It's more about what you learn about what they went through and how they did it. So anyway, I just thought these were super interesting and the contrast in them, and then how millennials, when you're 75% of the population of the workforce, how do you really end up framing it? All right, let's go to the next one. So the next one talks about, we talked about the independent workforce. So this slide was actually, this was a study done by EY. I thought it was actually quite interesting because it tells you a story, right? It speaks to that. If you look, the Edelman research in the corner here shows you that the 46% are independent workers already. So what the younger generation's already driving freelancers, being freelancers. It's 18 to 34 years old. It's changed dramatically even since 2014 to 2017. And you'll continue to see that number skyrocket. Now, that's me as an individual and how I want to operate. If you look on the other side of it, where you have the other charts that says mid-market size companies and large size companies, the interesting thing here is the number one thing that mid-market companies actually use freelancers for is very specific projects, right? It's to get them beyond the capacity of the workforce, to get new skills, to solve a particular problem. It's about 58% of mid-market companies use freelancers for that. If you look down to large companies, it's not far off. It's 54% actually use it or use freelancers to complete specific projects and programs. When you look at their leading number, though, it's actually to control labor costs. There's a mental switch that's happening in these companies of how they think about the external labor force, how they think about using it, where that value is. Again, it goes back to, I'm at a certain phase in my company. I'm at a certain phase in that transformation of that company. And so what do I need to do? What are the resources that I need? What are the skills that I need, especially as the skills market changes over the next few years and adapts? Remember, there's 60% of the US population is going to have to be reskilled. Well, how are you going to do that? That also brings up interesting stuff about what we'll all need to do, and as you know, as we look at the world of consulting and freelancing and how we need to keep our skills up. But anyway, I just thought this was a super interesting chart. You can see it was done in 2017. So Edelman did all the research, and E&Y had done some as well, and combined had created a whole publication. There's an amazing article or document that you can get from them on the freelance economy. All right, let's go on to the next topic. So the next thing that we looked at in the stats was about the occupation. I'm going to have to go find a new role. So you've got the millennial workforce, right? You then have the freelance economy. Then you've got this notion of I need to find a new gig. Like how's technology impacting the occupation story? So here, just to put out some big numbers and thinking 2030 and what the world looks like. Those of you that said artificial intelligence will have the biggest impact, pretty good. But I have to say it's more than that, right? It is a lot of different forces. That is one technology. The other thing that I found very interesting, and you'll see there's a lot of chatter right now, is that 80% of central banks are looking to shift to digital currency. That is a big shift. It's a shift in technology that's needed. It's a shift in skills. It's a shift in how we operate and how we think about how goods are bought and sold. Just changes a lot about the world, the economy, and the roles that are needed and the skills that are needed. I was actually having a conversation the other day, and it's a company that owns or offers up franchises to franchisees, and they wanted to actually they wanted to stand up an entire franchise that was all virtual, a whole thing beginning to end, no people. I just want to go stand up this franchise. I want to see it all stood up, no people beginning to end, no physical infrastructure, and no people. Imagine that. That's a combination of sort of the artificial intelligence, but you need a lot of other things with it. One of the other things that's interesting here is this notion around the world's youth will live in countries that are mobile first. 50% of the world's youth will live in these countries. So if you think about where those are, the highest population growth over the next 10 years, the leading country, number one, we've got India, we've got China, we've got Nigeria, and we've got Brazil as the leading locations for growth. And when you think about those countries, they're the ones that'll be, so you'll have youth, they're growing up mobile first. They're not growing up on, they're not growing up on our laptops. They're not growing up watching TV on a television. They're watching it on their mobile devices, all their payment transactions. So, we're all still trying to figure out how to use, payment solutions on our mobile devices. It will just be digital currency will be in time for them. All right, so I think there's a couple questions down here. Let's see. What do we have? It seems contrary to big banks would be interested in cryptocurrencies. It does actually, but if you read quite a bit of the most current news, and actually I had a conversation with a friend the other day who does consulting, and in the last 3 months, 3 to 6 months, he's helped 2 different banks that are looking to shift to all digital currency, and in particular evaluating cryptocurrency. So there's actually a lot happening in that space right now. So it'll be interesting to watch and see where it all goes. All right, so let's go. So we went from, like I said, millennials, right, to freelancers, to technology impact. Let's look at the aging workforce. Oh, actually, before we do aging workforce, I want to share this with you. Those of you that put that artificial intelligence was going to be like one of the primary leader of change and transformation over the next couple of years. If you're in the consulting world, if you aren't familiar with machine learning and artificial intelligence, and if you aren't using it as a mechanism for how you look at helping companies do strategy in the next 3 to 5 years, your role will be changed. You won't be leading them in strategy, you'll be doing something else. Why do I say that? So this article, you'll see this McKinsey article here, was actually just recent. It was just last month. And the interesting part was I had just been talking to somebody on the phone a couple weeks ago about, I want to automate strategy with machine learning. I believe there's an opportunity to do it. The world is very resilient. You have to have business resiliency. You have to look around corners. We as humans can't always look around corners. You're going to have to automate it. And so how do you automate looking around corners? So if you're familiar with PEST, political, economic, social, and technological changes, which is kind of what I'm trying to show you from a different angle. If you take all of those pieces and you put them together, and you can pull in that constantly changing data along with your market data and the trends around your industry, but other industries, you get a whole different way to do consulting. And what was interesting was when I was working with Solemn, one of the projects that we had come across was a company that happened to be, we'll just say, in the steel business. And when the impact came of COVID, they came to us and they said, we never thought about looking as far downstream as we probably should have. We looked at our industry and we looked at our direct buyers, which were B2B. We never looked downstream at the consumer. We need to look at what's happening in the consumer market and pull that forward. And how do we make that part of a dynamic strategy? Well, in parallel, I was also having a conversation with a private equity firm. So this particular Wall Street Journal article was interesting. It came out in 2018, and it says private equity turns to big data to find deals. This article is about a company called EQT Ventures. It's a private equity firm based out of Sweden. Very, very interesting. I talked to one of the partners. They had started sourcing deals a couple years ago using AI and ML to source deals. They believe that over the next 5 years or so, that their partners will not be the ones that source deals, that it will be machine learning and artificial intelligence that drives that for them. So I just thought it might be interesting as you think about your role, right, and the role of whether it's you or whether you're hiring strategy people or you're hiring consultants or are consulting or part of a consulting firm. It's going to have a big impact on how you rethink about what your role is relative to that consulting. It's probably most likely going to be something around how do I help execute that strategy that then was created? How do I create a roadmap for somebody? How do I make sure that the business and organization is resilient to be able to track to that roadmap? All right, let's go on and talk about reskilling, right? I thought this was interesting. There was an amazing World Economic Forum had published, it was in January. Again, this is part of some of the research I'd done for this education company. There's a reskilling emergency. Why is there a reskilling emergency, right? Jobs are going to change. Total on a global basis, 1 billion people will need to be reskilled by 2030. I gave you a much smaller view of it. If you look, 375 million on the other side, people will have to will switch occupations. The note above it, 77% of CEOs see the availability of skills as the biggest threat to their business. Now, remember what I said is I look at the opportunity being go in, do a project, right? So if you go back to that freelancers and what the role of the freelancers are and how they're using them, I think you're going to see more and more people using freelancers and individuals and independent consultants and consulting firms to fill those gaps on the skills that they need. And they're going to be there for a period of time. They're going to have an area of expertise and specialty, and then they will move on to the next one, or they move on to the next phase. If I'm a company, I move on to the next phase of my career and what I need next. The other thing that's interesting in this reskilling emergency, if you look at the bottom number, this one is super interesting. So 1.2 billion is the number of additional students. So go back to my Gen Z and millennials, right? So they're taking over the population. However, 1.2 billion people, additional students between K-12 and post-secondary will be in the market versus what's there today. What does that actually mean? It means you need 1 million additional teachers. So let's look at the bottom, on the bottom right-hand side, and it says specialized interpersonal skills will be high demand, including skills related to sales, human resources, care, and education. 1 million additional teachers are going to be needed between now and then, not less, more. Where is the majority of that growth? The majority of those 1.2 billion people are in Asia and Africa. Now, putting it all into perspective, the total population in 2030 is expected to be 8.5 billion. So putting it into perspective, it's still a lot of people, a lot of moving parts, and a lot of reskilling, right? You've got 20% of the population that's over 65. You have this 1.2 billion that needs to be educated. You've got some new roles and opportunities that you might need to have. Now, one of the other things that's interesting on here is I chose to pull out this, one of the things I'll share with you is I'm a very senior, meaning older person that recently went back to school. I never completed my undergraduate. I stopped after 3.5 years. I had about 10 classes left, and I recently returned. I returned more for me just to finish it. Like I wanted to go back and complete it. And one of the classes, it's interesting because I took all my really hard classes. Apparently now I have all my like light and fluffy classes, which makes it easy to do while you work. But one of the classes that was, they've all been interesting for different reasons, but one of the classes was around human resources. It talked about skills of the future. And I was taking that course at the same time I was taking my MIS course. And both of them talked about this specialized interpersonal skills that are in demand, and then where those skills are that are needed. The interpersonal skills I thought was super interesting. And that's going to take me to the next slide around the aging workforce. You go to the next slide for me. So the aging workforce, your baby boomers, your Gen Xers. Oh, by the way, if you're a Gen Xer like myself, we're the lost generation, but we're not soon to be lost. We're going to rise again because of the skills that we have, right? So the skills that we do have, right, as well as baby boomers, are those interpersonal soft skills. We are not walking around looking at this all day. We know how to interact. Not that I don't know how to interact, but it's those soft interpersonal skills. And it is something that the baby boomer and Gen X, right, it was all about relationship building. And it was all about in-person activity and in-person interaction. We've all learned how to adjust to that over the last few years. But those are critical skills, right? Critical thinking, problem solving. Those are some of the top 5 skills that are needed. Self-management, resilience, self-learning, right? Flexibility. So it's really, there's a big role to be played. And when you think about it, if parts of your business are going to be automated with artificial intelligence, what's the role of that aging workforce? It's actually to manage the people that are there. It is to bring that flexibility, that the problem solving skills, right? That I'll call it the systems level thinking. Anyway, I just found this super interesting because everyone goes, well, shouldn't say everyone, but there's this notion around ageism happening in the workforce. I don't really think that's going to continue to be true, right? I think that when we look at what skills are brought forward, there's a huge opportunity for everyone in a new role. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So there's one other thing that I didn't talk about here. It wasn't in those 4 categories, but it's something that's come up in almost every single conversation that I have had with any CEO across any industry, right? We make investments in companies. So this actually came from EQT and how they think about investing in companies, but it's also how CEOs are starting to think, right? We make investments in companies that deliver a positive impact or have the ability to deliver positive impact through our transformational support. This aligns with our purpose of future-proofing companies and making a positive impact with everything we do. So the way that EQT, when they think about the model that they've created for how they're going to actually train their AI model, it's future-proofing, so making sure that there's that resilience. But part of that resilience is also about making sure that it has a positive impact on society. There's another PE firm, Towerbrook. They also will only choose companies that are focused on sustainability or have sustainability as part of their way forward. And it is a mantra of almost every company that we see out there today. So the question is, for the role of consulting, right? You are also going to have to think about when you're building this future-proofed, resilient business, are you also thinking about it from how it makes a positive impact on this world and the changing world? All right. Did we have any questions we needed to answer, Erica, in the chat?
Not yet, just a little bit of discussion, side chat. You're spurring good thoughts for people.
Oh, all right.
It is a good place to pause and just ask the group any questions or any thoughts or interjections here. And don't be bashful if you'd like to come off of mute and ask a question directly to Laura, or feel free to use the chat.
Can I interject? I really liked Henry's Henry Park. I'm going to call on you. You brought up a good topic. I wonder if you would pose that to the public, to the rest of us.
Yeah. Well, so problem solving, I think, is what got us into the mess that we're in, right? Because like problem solving is very like historically focused, and you look at the problem now and see what you did before and try to fix it. Especially now with all the data that we have and the modeling that we can do, it's all about predicting the problems now.
Exactly. I like the question asking. Gigi put question asking. That's exactly it, right?
Question. Yeah. It's not what you know now. It's what questions you ask. That's more important, because you can Google all the data that you want. So it's that ability to think ahead and then come up with the right questions to ask. That's versus just sort of like sifting through data. And
absolutely. I think it's a combination, because you have to know how to read the data that you get out of it, right?
Sure.
So that's the trick, is how do we take all these changing. So what's interesting, to your point, Henry, part of the reason for showing all these different angles is, I think that if you keep looking out, right? If I keep looking out 5 years and 10 years and keep watching what things are happening and combine it with what's happening now, like in the present, and look out to the future and what trends there should be happening. To your point, could that help you predict, right? What might happen, or what steps you take. But yeah, I like that. It's all about question asking. That's great. Let's see what else. I'm trying to read these. Sorry, my glasses are not going back to your quiz. Our vote 68% said AI. It's not that it's no. I mean, AI is definitely going to have an impact. It's a combination of AI, but all these other factors. So you can't ignore adding 1.2 billion young adults into the market, right? You can't ignore the shift of power, the power center, the GDP power center shifting from kind of Europe to over Asia. Those combined with artificial intelligence, yes. So I think it's not just AI alone. It kind of goes back to, what happens first and when. It's what are the questions, you have to keep asking the questions. But I don't believe it's just AI. It's the combination of all of these factors that are happening at an exponential rate. Let's see, I'm trying to see if there's anything else. All right, so let's go to the next slide and see if we can spur some more thoughts and questions. So this is, as I said, I don't know if you guys are familiar, anybody familiar with Clayton Christensen's 4 functions of consulting? Have familiarity with that? So I've kind of took those 4 functions and made them into 5. Thinking about what does it mean for consulting firms in the future, whether you're a firm or an individual. And I'd love to hear your thoughts if you think there's a 6th or you'd switch one out. So one is thematic approach, right? So this is, do you have an area of expertise? Are you focused on solving I'm going to say solving a specific problem, but addressing a certain part of the business, right? Are you helping them grow a new business? Are you helping them move to a new market? Are you helping them? What's the thing that you're doing as part of the business? The second one is really around your network. So the network's always been important, right? That's our networks are always important. We see that even today through something like a tool like LinkedIn. We see it through our relationships that we garnered through school and through work. But this network is a network of, you know, if I'm a builder, right? Do I have a network of somebody that comes after me that I can help, that knows how I think about setting up what's been set up, or how I've gotten it started, or how I operate? It's that network of folks that complement you, and the network of players that complement you, whether it's or somebody that's brought an industry knowledge. So it's thinking about that network and what your role is in it, in that hub and spoke model, and then referring those others that complement what you do. So it doesn't vary a lot from what we do today. The next one is value creation. Value creation here is not just so it was interesting. I think it was Gigi had said, you know, it's about the questions you ask. I had a conversation with a customer the other day, and just kept asking them questions to get to a refinement of what the problem was that they were trying to solve. And they had said they had gotten more out of a 30-minute conversation than they had out of the last 3 years of different consultants that had come in to solve the same problem for them, right? It is exactly about asking questions. And the value creation is, at some point, you're going to actually have to show an outcome. It is not going to be about, I'm going to come in and predict. You're going to have to predict and also demonstrate value. You're going to have to show that that outcome happened in order to be able to get compensated for what it is that you do. So it's almost that you'll be paid based on outcome. And the other area is sustainability, which we talked about a little bit. I think that is going to be a critical part of your function as a consultant, and helping somebody shape their business, shape their organization, whatever it might be. But that will have to be top of mind. And then, of course, the last one is governance, and how you think about a governance structure for all of this, and ensuring it happens, of providing a framework for execution. One of the things that I've found is most large corporations do not have a challenge with ideas. They don't have a challenge with picking a path. They have a challenge with executing that path. So part of the role will be not just coming up with it, but giving them the governance structure to go execute that on that path. Any thoughts on these 5 functions? Would you add any? Would you remove any? Any thoughts on that?
Or Randy Levin had a question for you about how would you advise millennials or Gen Z on how they should manage their career, and what career advice would you give them given what we've been talking about today?
Consulting's great. No, I think part of it is think about what gets you excited. What do you like to do? I will tell you, it took me personally, and maybe this is just me, but it took me a long time, probably until the last, even in the last 3 to 5 years, where I got comfortable knowing that what I liked was being a builder. And that's what really, like, you got to think about, like, when you get excited and you talk about things, what is it that when your voice raises and you get energy levels about when you're doing it? And go do that, and wash, rinse, and repeat it. And don't worry about what other people think about whether you were somewhere for, I had somebody call me the other day, and they're like, you know, I'm looking for a long hauler. Are you a long hauler? I'm like, have you looked at my resume? I'm not a long hauler. I'm like, and by the way, why do you want a long hauler, right? What do you need them for? What are you trying to, you're trying to stand up a new business? You probably don't need that. So it's interesting, because it's find what your niche is, but also never stop learning. Now, I had mentioned earlier that I went back to school. And even though I'm taking these classes that are things that HR, organizational structure, right, things, law and the workplace, there are little nuggets of things that they make you look at it very differently. I also, by the way, I'm taking security certification on an online course. I also did a certification when I joined Google. I also am on a board seat. Like, I'm about continuous learning, and I do think, and you'll see that in my next, the kind of the last slide is, I think for millennials and Gen Z, you can't stop learning, right? The market continues to change. You'll have to change with it. So that's my lifelong learning track here. You are going to have to continue to reskill. It's not reskill now and then you're done. Technology transformation, there's a reason why Asha showed you that cryptocurrency and digital currency piece. That's going to change the market. You're going to have to understand that. How does it operate? How does it work? What does that mean? Where does it fit into how you do things today? There's just so much change happening. So I would say, find what gets you excited and then just keep doing it. All right, so Henry, yes, you had another great idea here. I can't fully read it. 1 second. You want to tell us about it, Henry?
You know what? As I was listening to you talk about the goal-based focus, right? There's a whole shift going on for consultants to really look at the goal and whatnot, and it just reminded me of a book Keith Ferrazzi wrote called "Leading Without Authority," I believe is the name, and he talks about co-elevating, and I think that's like just a different perspective of how to help the client versus doing something scoped. Like instead of saying, hey, we're gonna do this thing that you're assigning us, and it's very, management focused. It's more, hey, how can we grow together? How can we really, grow the company together? And it's about learning together as we grow together. I really like that approach.
Yeah, it's such a great point. So in my new role at Google, one of the things that's been interesting, new is all relative. I guess it's 5 months. I can't say it's new anymore, but one of the things that's been most interesting, Henry, is every one of these large corporations, they want to learn from Google, right? They're like, so my role is about making sure that they have a successful outcome, but my role is also about making sure they learn, well, how does Google do these things? So if I'm an automotive company, but I need to become a software company, right? I'm an automotive company. I'm still going to sell cars, but a lot of the vehicle and a lot of the interactions and everything I do is going to be software based. Google, can you help me understand what it means to be a software company, right? Not just from how I make software, but how I think about, how customers update that. How frequently do you update it? What's the expectation of a customer or consumer for that software update? How do you separate the hardware from the software, and how do you think about that from an agility perspective? How do you think about how you price things separately when it's a hardware versus a software? All of these things they're looking to learn. So I think that's such a great. I'm going to have to go read that. Is it an article or is it a whole book? What is that, Keith?
And Keith, what he was known for was he became the CMO over at Deloitte. Like, he was the youngest CMO over at Deloitte, and then he used these principles of co-elevation, and then he's been teaching it to a bunch of Fortune 500, because I think a lot of small startup, really scrappy startups have that culture of co-elevating and really learning from each other and growing. Without top-down management, it's very flat. But he looked at all those principles and put together a structure that large companies can use as well. And I believe he's done some stuff with Google. I know he did stuff at Facebook. There are a lot of Fortune 500 that have gone through his program.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's the other thing that's interesting that gets created, and you just made me think of this, and I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues that's been with Google for a long time. the culture at Google is quite interesting from it's very decentralized. And so when you think about, if you had a large population of your company that is consultants, you're decentralized. So it's about elevating each other. It's about it's knowing how to build relationships and have influence. So the other aspect is, how do you have influence, right? If you're not there full time and people are always shifting and changing in a world of freelancers, it's also about having influence. And so the way to have influence is to elevate others, right? That's one way to get to influence. So yeah, it's interesting. It just made me think of that when I literally had that conversation this morning. So
that's the best kind of influence, because like you're influencing each other.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's all very decentralized. It's not even bottoms up, so sometimes it feels like it might take us a little longer to make some decisions. But what really ends up happening is you end up with the best outcome, and you get some really interesting ideas and input from the experience that's there. All right, so this last slide really is about, so what does it mean, right? And you talk about, what do I need to do to move forward? You need to think about when you're doing your work, and how you think about, what do you know about being a responsible enterprise? What do you know about sustainability and responsibility, ethical, am I ethically sourcing organic cotton? Is it really organic? Am I ethically sourcing my food or my parts for my aircraft? What's my carbon footprint on that? I go back to that lifelong learning journey, which by the way, lifelong learning, one of the things that I put here at the bottom, if you're a consultant and you're moving from role to role at these different companies, your resume is going to look pretty crazy busy. I just think about the couple years I spent at Slalom and the number of customers that I worked with in those 2 years. If I had to put them all on a resume, it'd look pretty crazy. But there's this notion of, would I have to have a skill passport of some sort to know what I've done, have it authenticated, what I've done, not just the classes that I've taken, but the skills that I have, the soft skills as much as the tactical skills. I think there's a there in what that future holds. Are you able to actually help a company build a resilient business? And then of course, data, machine learning, and AI as part of your path forward. That is really it. I think kind of that's really the future framing for what you need, or what anyone needs as a consultant. I think a lot of us are going to end up being consultants, as 60% of us over the next few years. Any other questions, feedback? We have time, I think, to answer some questions if there are.
I have a question. In your ongoing strategy, you really highlighted the aging demographics and workforce. That really says, though, a company needs to think through their workforce strategy. And I'm wondering if you thought through how would one go about doing that? Because I think looking at several strategies that I'm involved with today, the workforce strategy seems to come as an after effect versus a thinking of it ahead of time and planning for that. And your presentation made me think that way. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that.
No, it's a great point. It is one of those. So the best use case that I like to think about. Now, they looked at it from a technology perspective, but I think their approach, if we applied it more practically to beyond technology and all these other skill sets. So I worked for AT&T in 2012. And I don't know if any of you are familiar, but in 2012, John Donovan, who at the time was the CTO, put in place a program with Randall Stevenson, the CEO and chairman. And that program was, by 2020, these are the skills that are needed. Here's the job. We're taking a swag at what the job descriptions are. Here's the 40 job descriptions that we know that we're going to need in 2020. We are going to give you the platform, the environment, and the time to take these classes. And a matter of fact, we'll actually pay you for them. Or we'll You can take them during working hours. And we want you to take these courses and get certifications. When we get to 2020, you can choose to have taken one of those courses and taken one of those career paths. And if you do, that's great. You will have a job here at AT&T. If you don't, we don't guarantee you'll have a job, right? So to your point, they did this forward-looking planning. No, it was around the future of network infrastructure. So network infrastructure at telcos or cloud-based infrastructure. So if you thought more holistically about your business that way and said, look, over the next few years, these are the skills that we're going to need. This is where we're going to need to go. This is how we need to look at our diverse workforce, where diversity isn't, it goes beyond culture. It goes to including age, right? It includes a whole bunch of other things that you need to look at. So I think it really changes the way you look at your future planning.
I would think it also includes what you consult or use consultants for in your workforce versus what you hire for. And according to your survey, or your not the survey, the chart you showed, 60% seem like they could be, consulting.
Yep.
So that says that needs to be a part of your workforce strategy in my mind. And I believe that just, wholeheartedly anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and what I thought was interesting was mid-market companies. What I found super interesting was mid-market companies actually had a higher propensity to use consultants for specific projects or to go execute something end to end versus just labor replacement, right? And so there were still a large companies that were using it as well for project completion, but the propensity was higher at mid-sized businesses, which I just thought was absolutely amazing. I think you're going to see a much bigger shift. All right, well, thank you all. I really appreciated the time and the opportunity, and thank you all for your input and ideas.
Laura, thank you so much for taking time today to share your perspective and insights from working across so many different companies and having had the opportunity to hire consultants, to be a consultant embedded in a major corporation. You bring a perspective that is unique for sure. Wonderful to see you here today. I just want to give a quick promo for our upcoming events. Our next event, if you love today, come back again. Our next is on May 28th. We have a partner knowledge exchange on June 2nd, our spring quarter tech boot camp demo day with UCLA students who are part of our Young Tech Professionals program. We look to them for a lot of inspiration for new ideas, new ways of thinking. On June 3rd, we will celebrate JPL's Flight of Ingenuity, and a huge congrats to our friends on the call today from JPL. That was very exciting to watch. We'll look forward to learning from you about innovation culture, robotics, and automation in aerospace. And then on November 4th, we have our annual Executive Leadership Awards. So stay tuned. If you have any questions, you can check out innovateucla.com on the events page to get more information, or feel free to email us. Thanks so much and have a wonderful evening, everyone.